would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. And let's get into it. All right, I'm here today with Benjamin Turale of the Temple of Mercury. Joining me from London in the United Kingdom. He's an operative alchemist as well as a transpersonal therapist. And are you still the current director of education at the International Alchemy Guild?
I am. Certainly am.
Awesome. And so I watched an interview I found of yours online, and I absolutely loved it, and I enjoyed every minute of listening to you speak. So I'm definitely stoked to have the opportunity to speak with you directly today. I also understand that you are a student of Robert Allen Bartlett as well as Dennis William Hawk. I fortunately have had the privilege to interview them both. So shout out to Dennis and Robert and the legendary humans that they are. Much love, appreciation, and gratitude to them both for their passion and contributions to alchemy. I definitely say that they are bearing great fruits. But aside from all that, is there any additional information about you that you'd like to address and add about yourself in terms of you and your overall background that you want to put out there?
Yeah, well, maybe it might just help to give a little bit more of just a quick personal overview for me. So, I got interested in the Western mysteries when I was a kid. Was just kind of drawn to them, and my dad was a gold prospector, actually. I come from an area of Australia called the Goldfields in Victoria, which some people might know is near Melbourne. And he actually found a lot of gold. And so having him bring home, like a fistful of gold, that was like a very indelible experience for me. It made a deep impression. So I've kind of realized now that I've gotten older that I'm sort of finding gold in my own way, I think, through alchemy, inner gold and outer. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there's too much else to say other than, yeah, I really appreciate what you've been doing in this space, building the community. And this podcast is such a great, you get such a great array of guests, and I've been a fan of it for a long time. So I'm very stoked to be here too and to be talking to you.
Definitely. Well, I definitely appreciate that. I do my best, do what I can do to help kind of push forward various topics within alchemy and esotericism in general. So with that being said, yeah, this is awesome. And before we kind of get into things, I do want to say that you do strike me as someone that has a lot of really good perspective and a lot to say. So I ask and I invite you to go into detail as much as you wish, because I want to hear it all. So with that, let's get into the gold, shall we? Literally, let's talk about some of your metallic works and gold specifically. I'll often be like browsing around on, say like Instagram or something, and I'll see some company come up with some maybe tincture of some gold related item, and there's a lot of shenanigans and marketing with all these things and out there. So I'm kind of wondering some of the differences in terms of like properties and the virtue contained therein. So maybe talk to me a little bit about something like the authentic oils of gold versus some comparable, seemingly similar items out there that maybe we can get into some of the methods for extraction and the viable preferred menstrums and so on. But yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, great topic, and I'm really interested in that too. It's a big one. So I suppose maybe I could start with just my entry into it. You know, my early days. You know, more than a decade ago, cutting my teeth. I wouldn't say learning alchemy, but like a lot of people, I guess I became interested in Ormus. You know, the monoatomic sort of thing. And I did some processes with that, and I sort of found, okay, that's an interesting, it's an interesting thing to do. You know, certainly there's some what we call in counseling, I guess we'd call parallel processing going on. So for those who've never heard of that, that's where, you know, we're doing something and the thing that we're doing changes us. You know, there's like a sympathetic connection between us and the materia. So in the literature I'd read about Ormus, you know, they did talk about that. They said, you know, your intention is important when you're working on this stuff. And so I made some Ormus, and it gave me a bit of a kick, I suppose. But later on, when I found, you know, really the more traditional approach to alchemy was when I was like dead set on, okay, I want to learn how to produce an oil. And I guess what you'll find, so that's one product you'll find out there is monoatomic elements. And, you know, the idea is that, again, for listeners who aren't familiar, but the monoatomic or Ormus product is like the idea that you can precipitate out of a process that you do with basic minerals. You can precipitate gold in a monoatomic form. You know, and there's some debate about what these products actually are and what they contain. But, you know, you've got that. But when we're talking about a true oil, I think we really can't, and I think you know this too, Sky, but we know we can't kind of go past Frater Albertus, because without him, you know, without him in the 20th century, I think a lot of us wouldn't really know anything about alchemy. It would still be locked away in secret societies. And the beauty of his system, and I'm a big fan of it, is, you know, that we can get the three essentials out of any materia on Earth. So whether it's vegetable, animal, mineral, we can get, if we were to put a materia into a flask and heat that flask up, you know, we don't have to add liquids or anything. Most materia would first yield up a smoke, a white kind of plume usually, and that comes over, and once that goes from air element into a sort of a liquid, we get a strong liquor, a penetrating liquor, also called the spirit or the mercury. And then if we keep heating it, the next thing that comes over is what we call a sulfur or an oil. So the oil comes over, or an oily type substance. And the final thing that's left behind in the flask, which will be black at first, is a salt that we will have to then purify to make white. So Frater, he was very fond of a particular approach to alchemy, and it's this system, I suppose, that you can separate out a salt, sulfur, and mercury, and it's a beautiful system because it's verifiable. You can repeat this process on just about, well, on anything really, on any living thing, whether it's animal, mineral, or vegetable, and get these three essentials out. So what is the oil of gold? Well, technically and scientifically speaking, from the process that Frater did, it's a catalytic reaction between the gold once it's been opened up, once its body has been opened. It's a catalytic reaction between the gold and what we call the menstrum in alchemy. So that's the solvent that's extracting it. So technically what's happening actually is that the gold is making a very strong, let's say, imprint or impression on the menstrum, and sort of, well, transmuting it, for lack of a better word, into an oil. And this method that Frater used, you'll find it's a very old method, actually. It comes from the 7th or 8th century in Arabia by an alchemist called Khalid ben Jazici. And you can find that very easily online in his book, Secreta Alchemy. Of course, there's more to just than just reading the process and getting it down the first time you do it, as is often the way with alchemy. And I've seen people, I guess online, they rubbish that approach a little bit. They say, oh, you're using aqua regia, and some people don't like aqua regia. They're like, it's people like Glauber, for example. He wrote about how a drop of aqua regia, it can harm living things. It can harm plants and living things.
Could you describe what is aqua regia?
Yeah, sure. Well, so aqua regia, it translates to the royal water, the king's bath. So it's essentially a combination of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid. So these are two very strong corrosive acids. But on gold, I mean, you can reduce gold down to a crystal with aqua regia. You just combine 3 parts hydrochloric acid, 1 part nitric acid, or maybe even less, depending on the strength. You can put your gold in there and the gold will dissolve. Now, as to whether it's corrosive to the gold, I would contest that, because you can dissolve gold into aqua regia, and then you can bring the pH of the aqua regia back down from an acid to a base, and the gold will precipitate right out again as a powder. And you can then smelt that. You can take it through the solvate coagular cycle again and put it back together, and it's still gold. I mean, it's still, in every sense of the word, gold. You could still throw it in the ocean for 10,000 years and it'll still come out perfect. Gold is incorruptible, So, yeah.
So with the idea of like selecting a particular menstrum, what's your personal kind of way about going about that, and how do you look at it, and how can you select a menstrum that you feel is going to be proper and effective?
That's a great question. So there's lots of menstrums for extracting gold. So you've got to first open the body of the gold. Without being too direct, in Secreta Alchemy, Khalid Benjazici, he mentions, it's a strong wine. So note out there that's out there, budding alchemists, that's not rectified wine. That's also known as that's the Argent Viva of the philosophers, according to St. Dunstan. It's lots of alchemists have written about that, Weidenfeld and many others, Lully's secret wine spirit. But the real trick is that you've got to be able to, first you're going to want to get the nitric acid out, because you definitely don't want that in the final product. And you've got to render the aqua regia, once the nitric acid's out, you've got to render that appropriately, so that at the end of your digestion, it's not going to carry over any nastiness. But that's one menstrum. But I mean, there are lots of menstrums for extracting gold. And it's funny, because a lot of the people who rubbish aqua regia don't realize that a lot of the menstrums have a lot more in common than they would think. Because another common one, for example, is you can get urine. You can ferment urine, and you can get some salts out of that, and you can separate out the 3 essentials and recombine them back together, the salt, sulfur, and mercury, and you can make a menstrum that will reduce gold philosophically, as in it will open the body of the gold again, just like the aqua regia will. And really, what we're talking about there is we've got ammonia and a nitrate salt. So anything that has a chloride ion and an oxidizing agent in it will reduce gold. So you could do that with urine. You can do that with a number of other things. Dew as well. Go on, sorry.
I was just gonna ask, so is the idea that so if we're looking at gold, and is it like the outer shell of gold that the goal is to dissolve and get to the inner core constituents of what's contained within it? Is that kind of what's going on?
Yeah, in a sense, we want to unlock its body, because the gold in a sense is impenetrable at first. It's sort of hard to get it to give up the ghost, to give up the mercury. So it has to be reduced philosophically somehow before it will yield up its soul, its power. Because a lot of things, especially in the metallic kingdom, are like that. They've got very hard exteriors that we have to break down.
Yeah. And so if somebody gets a colloidal, if somebody was to get like colloidal gold, would that be, is that in the same, is that like the same thing as an oil of gold, or is that different? Or could you
That's a
talk?
great question too. So that actually could take us on to another famous so-called alchemical preparation of gold. Um, it's a formula called Mademoiselle Grimaldi's Aurum Potable. So Aurum Potable, of course, that just means drinkable gold. So um, it's a simple method. I mean, again, you start with aqua regia, you dissolve the gold in it, and then you add essentially a vegetable magnet to that, which you can use rosemary oil. Rosemary, of course, having an affinity for the sun in sort of the law of correspondences. And what will happen is that the rosemary will drink up the gold from the aqua regia. But what's actually happening is that it's broken. The aqua regia has broken the gold down into nanoparticles, into very small particles, and the oil of rosemary has drunk those particles up. So all it's really done is dissolved the gold into the oil. So when you then take the oil and dissolve it into spirit of wine, what you're actually doing is drinking the gold. So gold is mostly inert, really. I mean, there's still a lot of study being done on this, but some things you'll read will say that gold is inert, meaning it'll just pass right through the body. So it actually doesn't really have much effect at all on you if you drink colloidal gold. You're drinking nano-sized particles of gold. Some other studies indicate that actually in modern medicine, gold can be useful for carrying medicine through to certain cells of the body. But that particular formula is a colloidal. So just remember, everybody out there, when you're drinking a colloidal, you're actually drinking the metal itself. You're not drinking the true sulfur or oil. By contrast, if I go back to Khalid Ben-Jazici's method, the fantastic thing about that method is after you've been digesting it, let's say for a year or more, what happens is that the salts or the gold itself will drop out of solution. So the salt is separated from the oil. So what you'll have at the end is an oily product, and you'll have the salt of the gold as well. So you're not drinking the gold. The gold is recovered afterwards. So that's sort of a bit of a difference between a colloidal and an oil. A colloidal is you're drinking the metal. An oil is what we would call, the soul, or the medicinal profile, the color, the tinct of the metal or the materia has been extracted out, that medicinal profile.
Wow, okay. And then I've heard this mentioned a few times. A lot of people will talk about the maturation process, and I'm wondering, what does that look like? Like, what is if you're to mature a metallic oil, what is going on there, and why is that important?
Yeah, well, maturation is important from a number of perspectives. I mean, first of all, you want to make sure that any metallic oil you have doesn't have any metallic salts in it. So, there are quick ways of getting metallic salts out of things, but they usually involve chemicals, which of course sort of might interrupt sort of the quote unquote philosophical nature of the process. I was talking earlier about that connection we have to the materia. We work on the thing and it works on us and changes us. If you circumvent that, you shortcut it with chemicals that store bought and you haven't made yourself, I think there is something lost. The connection between consciousness and matter is severed a little bit, I think. you're also introducing a product that might have been made in a factory somewhere, under who knows what conditions. So, if you're an alchemist, you're really interested in that intersection between consciousness and matter, because they're really just two aspects of the one thing, of the prima materia. So you want to ensure that when you're maturing something, you're keeping that hermetic system closed, as it were, between you and the materia. So there are ways to cleanse metallic salts from materia very quickly. Time is a factor as well, because the longer that something matures for, the better it gets, in a way. If you think about astral influences, we've got all of these stars around us, and they're all shooting all different kinds of light, of energy onto the earth, and as the moon passes around the zodiac, the moon is like a magnifying glass. It concentrates those energies onto us. So whatever constellation the moon is in front of, imagine that that's like a magnifying glass coming down onto the earth. It's why in Kabbalah it's said that we live in a sublunary world. We live below Yesod, because Yesod is always influencing us. So when your preparation's maturing, it's getting all of that astral energy beamed into it while it's sitting there maturing. And during that maturation process as well, things will drop out that are not pure. They'll sort of fall out of solution. So time is a factor too.
I like the way that you describe it. Kind of paints a picture in my mind of something being impressed, like the gold is, that maturation process is allowing with time a deeper impression of those, say, processes to occur, whether that's something that is celestial or otherwise. But I think that was a good description. Do you have any specific testing methods that you employ to test the quality and like the viability of the metallic oils, or are there ways like the layperson could utilize to determine whether the oils that they've received have been properly produced, or how would you go about that?
Yeah, there are ways for sure. Well, a simple test is pH. You can test the pH of something. That's an easy test to do. You can buy some pH paper and test, how acidic or alkaline is something. You can put a drop of it on a copper plate, and if it corrodes, you could probably just leave it and wait for it to sort of mature a bit more. If you're preparing things yourself, like a really simple way is to this is for, I guess, the alchemist practicing out there, is to think about, look into polar and non-polar solvents. So if we think about solvents, or we call them menstrums in alchemy, that you're using to create something, a polar solvent is something, if we think down the bottom, it's a ladder. So down the bottom of polar, we've got like water. It means that if something's polar, then the ions of a metal are going to stick to it. And so as we go up the ladder slowly, we go up to alcohol. That's more non-polar. Above that, we've got you might have something like acetone. Above that, even you've got like ether, diethyl ether, and up top you've got like petroleum ether, hexane, heptane, all these sorts of things. So if you're making something, you could reduce your oil down to, let's say, a gum, and then very quickly put a non-polar solvent onto it. So, ether or petroleum ether being the highest. And what will happen is that it'll drink the oil, and all of the salts will just drop out, straight away. So that's a very quick way as well of like maturing the metallic.
And that's something I was wondering, and it's kind of like a side note topic, but I was curious about, because if you ferment plant matter, it goes to what, ethyl alcohol or whatever, and then so you're talking about going up that ladder to things like acetone or ether. So say if you were to hold on, what is this? So I got this 190 proof organic spirit, which is, I think, would that be considered an ethyl alcohol or an,
Yeah.
yeah. And then so are there ways and processes to take this and then up level it to that higher order menstrum like you're speaking about with a natural process in some way?
Yeah, I mean, Basil Valentine's sort of got some of those processes in some of his books, and it's that sometimes you will get at the end of distillations of just ordinary alcohol, ethanol, there'll be very trace amounts of those sort of higher order things present sometimes, um, did like in tiny amounts, but there are certainly organic ways of, there's long ways of, again, like anything in alchemy, there's always philosophical ways of creating these things. Um, yeah, Basil Valentine outlines some of those as well. So yeah, you can get a non-polar solvent that helps as well. But I'd also say that like really good alchemical processes, you know, if you do them right and you do them correctly the first time, you shouldn't have to do too much of that. If all the operations have been performed correctly, like with oil of gold, for example, it will just come out at the end. All the salts will be sort of dropped out, and um, all you're really doing is just checking to make sure that it's all good. Yeah.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on in terms of metallic oils or just working with metallic compounds in general before we kind of move on to other topics?
Um, I would just say, it's a good question to have is if you're thinking about a metallic oil and what it is or what's in it, the three essentials are a really great model because it's sort of like thinking this product that I've got, what is it that I'm consuming? If I can take this materia and separate out a salt, a sulfur, and a mercury, you'll know more what you're consuming. If it's not got those elements, or those three essentials, um, in parts, then it's not a spagyric. It's something else, either a colloidal or whatever it is. Yeah,
All right.
that's all I'd say.
Well, the emerald tablet is obviously huge and core component within alchemy, and I've had people touch on it a few times on the podcast, and I recently had a little video clip to make sure that people weren't getting it confused with um, something called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. But besides that, yeah, I would love to just get your personal insight into this text, really in any way that you would like to go about lending your own perspective to the text and its nature. Please just feel free to tee off in however you'd like.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge topic. It's one of my favorite topics as well. Um, yeah, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth are later, as you said. They're a later. Um, they were channels, so to speak, in the 20th century. But so the Emerald Tablet. I mean, where to start? I mean, there's so much in that. I guess for listeners who don't know much about it, we could say that it's like a core text of alchemy, in the same way that the Heart Sutra is central to Zen Buddhism, or, the Lord's Prayer is central to Christianity. The Emerald Tablet is like it's a core, I don't want to say even text, because it's more than that. My own experience with it is that it's actually an living embodiment of Thoth, that energy, whatever you want, however you want to understand that, that energy of Thoth, or that archetype, or that god, or that nadir. The Emerald Tablet is like a kind of living egregore, I guess, of that energy. I know that sounds very esoteric though, so just to break it down into a more concrete way, the Emerald Tablet is a document too. It's a document we've got, and I'll separate here history from myth and legend, because I think that's really helpful. Historically speaking, we can date the tablet to between the 6th to 8th century AD. Copies of it come from, you can find a copy of it from Jabir, an Arabic alchemist. It's in a book called the Secret Book of Secrets, which is pretty secret, right? It's in another book called On Advice to Kings, which is Aristotle talking to Alexander the Great and sort of giving him stuff to think about. So we can date it very concretely, at least to the 6th to 8th century in Arabia. But the only problem with that is that we know that, in the Arab people are having their enlightenment, almost they're having their renaissance at that time, right? Like they're getting mathematics and architecture and, alchemies, all those good things are coming in, and they're having a flowering of culture. And you got to say, well, where did they get that knowledge from? And all signs point really to Alexandrian Egypt, because not only because we've got, a book where, it's advice to kings, to Alexander the Great, but, that's what all the Arab sources say. They say that, we got this stuff from Egypt, alchemia, alchemet from Kemet, from Egypt. So the historical story of the tablet, I mean, we don't have evidence for it, but the texts really point very strongly to Alexandrian Egypt, sort of 2nd, 3rd century AD at least, because that's when we've got a lot of famous alchemists coming out of Alexandrian Egypt. We've got Maria Prophetessa, we've got Zosimus, we've got Cleopatra the alchemist as well, not the Greek queen. So around that time, then we go into legend, myth and legend, right? So the legends say that Alexander comes to Egypt, and the Egyptians are almost like, well, welcome, because they've been fighting the Persians and they're kind of sick of it. So they sort of welcomed him in. And the legend says that the first thing he does is he goes to the Temple of Amun in the Siwa Oasis, where they made sal ammoniac, because sal ammoniac is actually the salt of Ammon Ra. It was made at the Temple of Siwa. And it's said that near the Temple of Siwa, there was another temple, a secret temple, where the Emerald Tablet was kept. So the Emerald Tablet was literally a tablet made out of emerald. It was said to be, the writing on the Emerald Tablet was said to be made in relief. It wasn't carved in. So it was a tablet made either of emerald or of something green. And Alexander then basically takes that and he takes it back to Greece. He puts it on display, and we've got accounts of people seeing it, I suppose, but not records of the tablet itself. And then the tablet's lost, maybe for a few hundred years. Later on, we then get a guy called Balinus. So this text is referenced later with the Arabs, the book of Balinus the Wise on causes. He was a man from the town called Cappadocia, and it's said that this is another great legend, another great story around the tablet. But this legend says that there was a statue in his town, in Balinus's town, of Hermes, and on the statue it said, something like, may he who wants to find the secrets of nature inquire at my feet. And Balinus was a kind of a weird boy. He was very interested in learning, and his father kind of was a bit worried about him because he wasn't interested in things that all the other boys were interested in. I think we can all relate to that. And he just wanted to learn stuff. So he would go to this statue of Hermes and he would prostrate every day and he'd sleep there and one day he slept at the feet of the statue and he awoke from a dream and it suddenly clicked into place. He's like, oh, why didn't I think of that? So the statue says, inquire at my feet. So he started digging and he dug down, and he found a cave. And inside the cave, there was a skeleton or a corpse, and it was holding the emerald tablet. And amongst that cave were other treasures, other hermetic treasures. So probably the Corpus Hermeticum, and who knows, maybe a few manuals on alchemy. So yeah, he finds the tablet, and then he sort of becomes a bit like Jesus, actually. Some people say that maybe Jesus was modeled a bit after Balinus, who later became known as Apollonius of Tyana, because he was a wandering mendicant, just like Jesus. He healed people and didn't take payment. He performed miracles. He took gemstones and enchanted them and left them at special places. He did all sorts of things. So,
Wow. Yeah, I've mentioned and heard Apollonius of Tyana a lot of times, but I never had made that connection or heard that story. That's awesome that you had brought that up because yeah, that's just something that I was not aware of at all. The
yeah.
Emerald Tablet, that's really cool. And then I was also wondering, um, was it the Book of Causes? That's what it was.
Mm.
Is that
Balinus
a
the Wise, yeah.
is that an available text? Do they have an English translation of that?
Yeah, I think you could probably find it online, I think. The Book of Balinus the Wise on Causes. Yeah, I think you could probably find, just off the top of my head, you might be able to find a copy on sacredtexts.org or
Yeah.
maybe on Adam McLean's website.
And is there
Um,
any historical notes on what happened to the Emerald Tablet after that instance?
no,
No.
no. The tablet, interestingly though, the tablet vanishes, and this is where it's interesting to look at the rise and fall of cultures, because we have Egypt, right, and we've got all this sacred knowledge. I mean, we always, you learn in school, like with history, they always teach you about Western history. Oh, it starts with the Greeks or the Mesopotamians, but you kind of go, where did they get all this knowledge from? Well, I mean, all the Greek philosophers went to Egypt to study. That's well written about, even in their own writings. They say they all went to Egypt to study. And so you've got Egypt, it's in possession of alchemical knowledge. And of course, with that knowledge, they can do all sorts of things. But then when alchemy leaves Egypt, in the fourth century, you get, the persecution of pagans and the destruction of the temples, the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria. Everything moves to Byzantium. And then once all the knowledge leaves there, Europe falls into a dark age. But of course, the teachings then go to the Middle East, and they have a renaissance, right? They've got a copy of the Emerald Tablet because it was obviously housed in the Great Library of Alexandria, copies of it. Alexander the Great, he founded that library to preserve all the Hermetic knowledge. And then all of that knowledge is shooting up and down the Silk Road, and it's going to Persia as well. So that by the time Egypt and Alexandria collapses, the Arabs have that knowledge, and of course they have their flowering of alchemy. But then it leaves them and comes back into Europe through the Moorish invasions through Spain, and then you get the Renaissance kickstarting. So you follow the tablet, or at least the writing, and each time you see an exaltation of culture, because again, the tablet is a living stone of alchemy, of Thoth. It's got wisdom and knowledge in there that can transmute or change things on any level. So whether you're working spiritually, let's say, if you're doing spiritual alchemy and you're working on the mind, or if you're working on the level of spirit, you can apply the teachings of the tablet. But if you're doing operative alchemy, if you're doing alchemy in the lab, it gives you the outline of the whole of the great work too. And I would even argue that, spiritual alchemy and lab alchemy, they're sort of one and the same. I mean, some people say, oh, only spiritual alchemy, only that's alchemy, or only lab alchemy, that's alchemy. But I would say that real alchemy is both, because it's as much about the redemption of man as it is of matter, or woman, or a non-binary term.
Now, I've seen online there are images or at least depictions of images of the Emerald Tablet, and it has
Mm,
some kind of symbol set encoded within it.
yes.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective and from your knowledge, is that in any way uh valid, or what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, somewhat. What you're probably talking about there is you've got a lot of alchemical art that we have in the West. It comes to us from the Renaissance. I mean, there are examples of alchemical art earlier. Like again, if we go back to Alexandria in Egypt, we've got some images of from Cleopatra the alchemist and whatnot. But those images of the tablet and of alchemy, they come later. But they are artists' impressions of what it looked like. But there is some validity because it's said that the tablet was written in Phoenician, ancient Phoenician. So what they've then done is authors have gone, okay, well, let's write the tablet out in Phoenician. And that's kind of how it must have looked, maybe. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So Phoenician, yeah, I'm not too familiar with the origins of that that system of Phoenician. So that's pretty cool. Is that
Mm.
something that was used in Egypt at some point, to your knowledge, or
Well, I mean,
preceding, perhaps?
yeah. I mean, I think it all would have been, at this time you got to think the Mediterranean too. It's such a hub of activity. There's so many cultures all mixing and intermingling and exchanging things. Um, you can look into history and see connections between everything very easily. I mean, if we just think about the authorship of the tablet, it says at the end of the tablet, therefore I'm called thrice greatest Hermes Trismegistus. So to the Greeks, the author of the tablet was this sage or a person, Hermes Trismegistus. To the Egyptians, it would have been Thoth. Thoth was given that epithet quite commonly, thrice greatest. He was called three times great. Um, but there's also a Phoenician god whose name escapes me right now, but he's sometimes depicted between two snakes. Which, of course, if you think about the caduceus, Hermes' staff, it's got two snakes. You go to the Egyptian sources, you look at Thoth, and um, Thoth is sometimes depicted with two staffs with snakes around it. Um, and this god from the Phoenician god depicted with two snakes. There's some kind of connection between snakes or what's called the Ophidian current in the writings of Kenneth Grant that connects alchemy and the tablet and lots of esoteric teachings. The current, the snake. So I think there is some viability to the fact that it could have been written in Phoenician. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me want to learn more about Phoenician too, just because I think it's probably pretty valuable in terms of like a symbol set. Probably has some kind of potency to it, I would think. Um,
Mm.
my other question I wonder, kind of similar on that subject, is the language of Enochian. I know
Mm.
I've heard a lot of people draw comparisons between Enoch and Thoth or Hermes, and I'm wondering from your perspective, and I think that was a sort of channeled language, but it did have a lot of interesting validity to it. I'm wondering your thoughts on that language and that symbol system, and if you worked with it or have learned anything about it, or just your thoughts on that.
Well, there is kind of a connection there because Enoch, I mean, if we go further back in history and we trace the Ophidian current, you can look between the cultures of Egypt and you read the Book of Enoch, which is not really part of the Torah, but it's you can find it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it is very old and it's sort of accepted as like a Gnostic text as well. But Enoch was said to be the great grandfather of Noah, But the story goes that Enoch, he's kind of a figure like Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes thrice great, meaning he's a god, he's a demigod, he's a man. He can travel between worlds. This archetype of Hermes or Mercury travels between worlds. He can be in the world of matter, or he can be in the world of spirit. That's why he's our patron god in alchemy. But Enoch was a bit like him, because if I rewind the clock a bit, and I hope you don't mind me going into more stories and myths, but
Definitely not.
okay, so let's rewind the clock even further, and we go into the antediluvian stories, right? We go into before the flood. The stories go that, um, you've got this overarching energies, let's say, of the Watchers, or these gods. Some people say they were aliens. You could also say they were archetypes. They were energies within us.
Was Archons? Is that one of the names? Or is that a
Yeah,
different?
perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps that is, yeah. Archon, I think, no, is a Gnostic name, another name for the demiurge, I think.
All right.
But so it's this idea that gods come down to earth, and humanity is like stupid, for lack of a better word. They're kind of kicking around in the dust, shaking sticks at the sky. And these gods basically, they send down, let's call them archangels, and the story goes that they exchanged, actually, for sexual favors with women, the secrets of alchemy, and the secrets of agriculture and all these sorts of things, and they kickstarted civilization. Now, the offspring of these demigods and people were, the Nephilim. So there were these giants that roamed the earth, and they were a bit troublesome. They would kind of cause havoc. And Enoch, coming back to what we were saying earlier, Enoch was the guy who was like a go-between between the gods and humanity. So he'd travel between the above and the below. And the story goes that one day the gods gave him a message to give to humanity, which was that, um, it's something, I'm paraphrasing and I'm probably screwing it up a bit, but you were in heaven and you had the true mysteries, but in the coldness of your hearts, you gave these mysteries to humanity, and now men and women wreak much evil on the world with them. So it's the idea that these sacred teachings were given to humanity to kickstart civilization, but we're sort of still in that world a little bit. We've got all this technology and all these tools and all of this knowledge, and yet, we can't seem to get our act together in an ethical sense, I suppose. So Enoch gave that message to humanity, and then, of course, the punishment for all of the wickedness was, supposedly, the Great Flood, which you'll find analogs for in lots of cultures. You'll find stories of the Great Flood. You'll find it in, you'll find it in Egypt. You'll find it in, Judaic stories. You get it in, lots of indigenous cultures too, in Mexican culture, in Australian culture.
Sumerian tablets.
Sumerian. Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
So Enoch, is sort of like a patriarch, but I guess, to come back to your question, Dee and Kelly, I suppose, they're interesting figures in this whole continuum too, because so Kelly Kelly was said to help out John Dee by being his scryer, and they channeled, the Enochian language, because they were trying to get back to that time of Enoch. They wanted to sort of tap into and find a language and a magical system that spoke the original language of God. That's what Enochian is supposed to be. And Dee drew on many contemporary sources at that time to channel that, and he used a lot of, magical information to facilitate that. But that's sort of there is a connection there with Enoch, I think, because Enoch was sort of like a prototypical Hermes or Thoth, energy. He really embodied that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was long. I'm sorry. I realized that was a long answer.
So fascinating. I can't get enough of all of this. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on in terms of the Emerald Tablet?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Any
we're only just warming up.
Oh, awesome. Good. I'm excited.
So
Because
I mean,
it's
that's yeah. Sorry, go on.
I mean, I'm very surface level in terms of my knowledge. So I'm just hoping to hear more because this is all super interesting for me.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? So the tablet, yeah, it's that's a little bit about the history and I guess the context of, you know, what goes into it, culturally. I mean, that's very broad strokes I've given, but um, so then then you got the tablet itself, the writing, and I'll just kind of spout off a version of that. So the tablet says, in truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable, that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one. And just as all things have come from this one thing by the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon, the wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of the above and the below. Thus will you obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. From this come many wondrous applications because this is the pattern. Therefore am I called thrice greatest Hermes Trismegistus, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein have I explained the operation of the sun. So that's the tablet itself. It's not long. I mean, but God, is there a lot in there? That it's jam packed full of stuff. And if you can understand the concepts that are in the tablet, you've got a handle on basically all the core Hermetic concepts, which I'm happy to go into a little bit if you like.
I wonder, I'm sure that you've gone over this multiple times, and I wonder if you have had this thought where it talks about this being the operation of the sun, and then within the text it says its father is the sun and its mother is the moon. And I wonder if that for you strikes anything in your mind, or what how you like reconcile that, or what that means to you.
Mm. Yeah, there's like so many. That's a great question because there's so many things in that, I think. Um, and this is what the tablet does, doesn't it? It's sort of
Instigates
yeah.
contemplation.
Well, I'd first ask, what do you think it is? What's the sun and the moon to you?
Well, I would think that they would represent the kind of like divine feminine and divine masculine, or that yin and the yang aspect of the monad. That would kind of be
Mm,
my my assessment, I would say.
yeah, that's a good answer. And there are no right or wrongs, of course, because you know, just like all great things in alchemy, it's not a science. It's a language of symbols and analogies, and um, it's a holistic system too. Just like for example, when we take a spagyric or or an oil of gold or whatever, these things work on in a holistic way. They don't just it's not just one thing. It can work on an image system, on a symbolic way. In our minds, they can work in a physical way on our body. So with the tablet too, it could be pointing to a spiritual truth, or it could also be pointing to a physical substance as well. So that's one of the mysteries of the tablet, is
Yeah.
what is that thing it's talking about.
Yeah, and as you go through it, my thought is it's describing the nature of the all, and how it kind of emanates out, and how it all itself perpetuating in some fashion, but then the operation of the sun at the end of it kind of makes me wonder if there's more to it than that. And I'm kind of curious as what that's speaking of. And because like you could relate the sun to the operation of that solar principle, or the operation of the soul, or the operation of gold, or it's something along those lines of that exaltation, the operation of the highest form of ascent. And so I don't know, I'm just curious how you take that and like your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's all those things. Like you've just said, again, it's a holistic truth, isn't it? Because all those things are interconnected. As much as we might exalt matter, we might take something, to use a crude analogy for alchemy, we might take something from a leaden state to a golden state. We might evolve matter and raise the vibrations. So too, at the same time, is that parallel process where exalting and perfecting ourselves. There's that famous quote, if you don't transmute yourself first, you will transmute nothing. I think Paracelsus said that. So I think everything you just said is true. Where the tablet is talking again about, it could be talking about you as a person. So the solar work or the operation of the sun could be said to be to take something to gold, to take it to that highest state of perfection. Or to, what is the sun? I mean, the sun is the central star in our system. It's the thing that gives everything life, and it's perfecting everything. It's literally making everything exist, to grow, all life. So the Emerald Tablet is teaching us how to evolve either matter or ourself, or a relationship, or an organization, or whatever the hell you want to apply it to, really.
I think as I was kind of saying it, kind of, I don't know, tied in a little bit more for me. I'm sure that happens the more that you look at these things. But yeah, I would like for you to describe and talk a little bit about those principles contained within this.
Absolutely. I mean, well, if we take the first, we could divide the tablet up into what we call rubrics. So a rubric is like, how you think about old books, how you have the first line, you have a letter that's really big, like the letter's big, and then you have little script.
Yeah.
That's like a rubric. It's like comes from the Latin for red. So we can divide the tablet up into 7 rubrics, 7 sort of sections. The first rubric is, in truth without deceit, certain and most veritable. It's imploring us to basically take the learnings of the tablet and verify them for ourselves. It's saying, hey, do you want to take this journey of alchemy with me? Take the blue pill, come down the rabbit hole.
I think it's a red pill.
Or is it the red pill? I can't remember.
There's a lot of different pills these days. So
yeah, yeah. I'd say take them both.
Purple pill.
Yeah. Yeah, the iosis. So yeah, so one principle it introduces us to straight away is that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above is that which is below. So I'm just going to outline a few things that I sort of think it's talking about, but I would recommend to anyone who's interested in the tablet, the first thing that you do is just find a copy of it online, and you take all of the keywords and substitute your own words. Like, think about each word, like think about above. What does that mean for you? Write down a word that makes sense for you. Like you might swap above for heaven, or you might swap it for sky. You might substitute above as mind. You might say that which is above, is mind. So the tablet's talking about above and below, as within, so without. You find that in pagan circles, you find it in Wiccan circles, repeated ad nauseum. So you've got that. It's a central concept. It's the idea that all things are interconnected. That there's levels to reality. It's almost like a hologram. things are connected. It's synchronicity. That's another big topic we could also talk about.
Oh yeah, we're gonna definitely have to get there eventually.
um, I'll cycle back to that later. But so in the first rubric, it's talking about the above and the below, the idea that the inner and the outer is connected. It could also be talking about astrology. It's the idea that the energies that are all happening up there are influencing us down here in the below in Earth. It's the idea of signatures in alchemy. It's that every living thing on Earth contains a signature from the above. So plants, for example, can be said to have planetary rulers. There's an archetype that's pervasive throughout the universe that rules everything. It's the way that Melissa, the herb Melissa for example, is ruled by Jupiter. So there we've got an above and a below, right?
Yeah. Another thing, as that first opening few lines, I mean, it says right there, the above corresponds to the below, and that's that principle of correspondence. And I wonder, I'm sure that you're familiar with the Kybalion, and I think there's debate over where that text originated or whatever. As I don't know if it really matters, because it's pretty awesome in my opinion. But
Yeah.
it talks about the 7 principles, and I wonder from your perspective, because it feels like, almost to me, it feels like those 7 principles can be derived from the Emerald Tablet as well, because it contains within it kind of all of those understandings. Do you kind of feel that way as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. Those 7 sort of hermetic laws, they're in the tablet for sure. Because you do have polarity. That's one of them in the Kybalion, right? It's that idea of polarity. You see that repeated in the tablet. You've got the father is the sun, the mother is the moon. It's the idea that as human beings, we're binary creatures. We see everything in duality, right? Day, night, me, you, left, right, love, hate, everything we do is binary. So like an alchemical principle for healing, for example, is that you bring together opposites. When you bring the two together, the sacred marriage of the sun and the moon is when you bring together any two things into a successful wedding, it gives birth to a third thing, the hermetic child, which Carl Jung called the transcendent function. It's a thing that is both like the first two things, but yet also separate. It unites them, and yet is differentiated from them. So if we ever want to go up, if we ever want to go from the below to the above, we have to bring together duality. If we bring together left and right, we go up. So yeah, there's definitely resonance there, I think, between the Kybalion and between the Emerald Tablet. And if you look at any alchemical drawing too, you'll see that there'll always be a left and a right. There's always duality, and somewhere in the middle you'll find the alchemist. You see that on the image of the Emerald Tablet. I don't know if you've seen that mandala.
Yeah. What was the word again? The mesocosm?
The mesocosm. That's it.
I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that to my awareness. I'm gonna start using that.
It's great, isn't it? It was gifted to me from another alchemist. Yeah, so we've got the above and the below. Another concept is the prima materia. That's also what the tablet's talking about. It is sort of saying all things come from this one thing by adaptation. So on some level, it's like saying all things are just this one energy. All is one. just like in the Kybalion too. All is one. There's just this one energy in the universe transforming and becoming different things. And to understand it, we need that mercurial mindset to understand that things change, and how do we have this permutations of form through light, the condensation of light. That's the study of alchemy in a way, is how to change things from one state to another. So the prima materia, what is this one thing? That's the mystery of the tablet, that it's kind of compelling you to try and find what is the one thing, what's the prima materia. Because if you know what the prima materia is, then you can start doing the work, which is in the next rubric. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. It's saying the wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. So I'd sort of invite listeners to consider right now, what do you think this one thing is? What is this one energy that has the father as the sun, the mother, the moon, the wind carries in its belly, its nurse is the earth. It's the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned to earth. What is that? And I'd almost ask you too, like, I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but
I mean, I guess what comes to my mind is just life, and the gift of life, and consciousness itself almost, but then that's kind of something to wrestle with, consciousness itself, because it's almost more than that. I think it almost is mind and matter, and the animating principle that unites both of them and works through them in some way, or I don't know. I'm just kind of winging it right here, but
you said a word that I love, which is consciousness. I think that's a great answer too.
Yeah,
because I guess we get into the field of quantum mechanics and things start getting really weird when we start looking at interactions of consciousness. I mean, to create the universe, to create space and time, you need an observer. If there's no observer, there isn't space and time. That's what Einstein's all on about. He gets onto a tram in Vienna, I think it is, where he's working as a patent clerk. And as he's on the tram, he's leaving work and he's looking at a clock. And as the tram's pulling away, he starts to imagine, if this tram just started approaching the speed of light, what would happen to the clock? And he did a lot of his best theories through his imagination. He would just imagine things, very alchemical in a way. And he started to see that, time is slowing down as I'm approaching the speed of light. So there's this idea that time and space are relative to the observer. So there is a very real interaction between the consciousness of a person and space and time. It actually creates space and time, which is also why I think, I'll just make a side note, that I prefer to think of sulfur in alchemy. I don't think of it as consciousness. I think of it as personality. I think of it as soul, because I think even though consciousness can be particular to you, it's actually a quite impersonal thing. It's actually just the space in which things occur. I actually think consciousness is more akin to spirit, because consciousness is an animating force.
I would agree. Yeah.
So where was I? I have a tendency to go off on tangents.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, you didn't. I derailed me. So consciousness, you said consciousness was maybe the one thing. And I think that's a really good answer too, because it's like, that's a theory that still hasn't really been proved or disproved. The idea that actually the consciousness, the universe is actually consciousness. It's like or some rudimentary form of consciousness. Matter is a real thing, but as I think Max Planck, or it might have even been Einstein, said, the universe begins to look much more like a giant thought than it does like a thing, because it's so dependent on the observer and for space-time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, so the one kind of, I guess, confusion for me when I think about this is because it all feels very geared towards our solar system when it
Mm.
talks about in terms of the terminology with the sun and the moon and then its nurse being the earth. But then so if I think about it in terms of an all-encompassing consciousness, I'm like, what about all the other planets? What about all the other exterior stuff out there? But it may be that it's designed to be relative or relating to get the concepts across for the observers of the readers. So I can see it kind of both ways, but just throwing
Mm.
that out there as a thought.
Well, I think you're onto something there. I mean, again, I think it's probably a bit binary with the sun and the moon because again, we as human beings are binary creatures. It's probably our truth, I would say. It's the key to unlocking the secrets of our perception and our truth and the way we see the world. Um, but I guess another way to think about the prima materia is so yeah, we could say it's consciousness, we could say it's love, we could say it's a lot of things. From a lab perspective, we could say that it might be dew, actually. So that's one leading theory about what the tablet is talking about. It's actually talking about dew. You know, you think about it, its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. You know, dew is created in that mesocosmic space, right? That liminal space between night and day, you know, or in the night. And it precipitates out more, you know, when this, you know, you've got some heat and some moisture. The wind carries it in its belly and its nurses the earth. It's found on the earth.
And I wonder if the dew would be similar to rain.
Hmm.
And it kind of brings to mind that for me too. And when I'm thinking about particular chemical operations where you could take rainwater or dew and collect them, and you can get life that springs up out of them in the form of like the mineral kingdom, even the animal kingdom. And I think I talked about this with Bartlett, where he was going into how he had separated them into their elemental phases, the
Mm.
the same collected water through a distillation process where you get the elemental correspondences to each of those from just the water, which you would think is just water, but within that water contains all of those constituents. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of interesting to think about too.
Yeah, I mean that's basic spagyric anatomy again, isn't it? It's like all things on Earth, you can divide out, you can do spagyric anatomy on it. You can divide up all the fractions. You can get a salt, a sulfur, and a mercury, or the four elements, depending on how you want to look at it, in terms of the sequence of the process. But that's very intuitive of you actually to say that, I think, because you know, there is an analog between dew and rainwater, at least rainwater that has been produced during a thunderstorm, because
Yeah.
both produce niter. Um, so that could be said to be, again, a subject of the tablet. It's teaching the next section, which goes over the operations of alchemy. You know, separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It's saying, you know, basically do your spagyric anatomy on dew to get your elements and recombine them into a philosophic menstrum that's
Mhm.
capable of reducing things down to its most chaotic state, you know, like we were talking about earlier with gold. So it could be dew. Oh, sorry, go on. Did you want to
Oh
say
no, it's
something?
just yeah, I'm thinking about this and it's just so interesting. I just wish I knew more about dew because I don't really know too much about a lot of the properties and all of that, but it's just fascinating contemplating it. So yeah, go on.
Well, yeah, I mean, dew's interesting because it's like a fertilizer. It's like our universal fertilizer. We could think about the world, right? And we've got all these energies coming to the earth through light, and you could sort of think about the earth as like filtering them through all the layers of the atmosphere, and then it produces a kind of a fertilizer, you know, and it comes out as dew. It's got niter in it, you know. So um, it could be dew. Another contender, another famous contender with the tablet is it could also be Salomoniac. Philosophical Salomoniac is another possibility, because the operation of the sun is mentioned at the end of the tablet, and that could said to be a salt that's present in all living things too. That can be found in urine, but it can be found in plants. It can be found in all things, really.
Can you
it's an
elaborate
acid.
a little bit on Solomoniac?
Yeah, yeah, I could. How much time we've got?
As much as you need.
Okay, well, Salomoniac, again, like it's produced, first produced, well, not first produced, but famously produced at the Temple of Ammon. Uh, Hence we get sal ammon, sal ammoniac, the salt of Ammon. And this is a very alchemical podcast, because we're connecting to earlier parts of the podcast now, aren't we? We're going back to the origins of the tablet. But sal ammoniac is essentially ammonium chloride, so it's a salt, and it's a special salt that Paracelsus called it an astrum. It's a, without giving the game away too much, it's like a living thing at the heart of beings, and it's a thing that can be separated out. So there's let's say there's salomoniac from a scientific perspective, which is ammonium chloride, but there's also philosophical salomoniac, right? So just like we say salt, sulfur, mercury in the three essentials, we're not actually literally referring to mercury, quicksilver. We're saying it's philosophical. So in the same way with salomoniac, you've got like a chemical salomoniac, but you've also got a philosophical salomoniac. And separating that out from plants and living things is I'd recommend people look into some texts like Opera Vegetable by Hollandus. There's lots of texts that talk about it. So the tablet could be talking about that too, because it is the consecration of the whole world. Its inherent strength is perfected when you turn it to earth. You can use it. It's sometimes said to be the philosophical gold, rather than the philosopher's stone being about actual gold itself. Some people argue that, oh, well, what you're really doing is working with salomoniac, a special salomoniac. Yeah, so salomoniac's another contender. And another great contender, which I think is a really good one too, is antimony, actually. Because you can get a sun and a moon out of antimony. You can get a solar aspect out of it, and a lunar aspect. You can get a red and a white stone.
Yeah, and then I was recently listening to a Jean Dubois lecture, and it was with a translator. So a guy was translating what he was saying, but um he was talking about antimony, and I think he was discussing how somehow antimony contains within it all of the planets. And I don't really know exactly how that is or why that is, but when he was talking about producing the Regulus, he was also talking about producing you can make a Martian Regulus or a Venetian Regulus.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. But there's something with antimony and its ability to contain within it the planetary, multiple different planetary aspects. And then I think what he was relating it for was the ability to be able to use it in a way to transfer by creating an amalgam, transferring those aspects into the Regulus or something along those lines. I don't really remember exactly right now.
No, you've summed that up very well. Yeah, you can. You can make a star Regulus and fuse it with any metal, most metals, and special preparations of antimony can evolve those metals in certain ways. But even if you just make a glass of antimony, I mean, you can make the glass of antimony into any color, really. So that's often what's said to mean that it contains the rays of all of. It's got all the signatures, right? It's got all the archetypes within it. So antimony is one good theory, I think, about the tablet, and it's sort of not my theory. I wish I could take credit for it, but There's a good book called Cracking the Philosopher's Stone, in which Eric J. Laporte, he sort of puts forth the idea that the tablet was a product of an Alexandrian school of alchemy, maybe the one that Maria Prophetissa, Mary the Jewess, a famous alchemist, that she was a member of. And it's sort of a guidebook on working with antimony too. So I think that's a leading contender as well. But like everything in alchemy, again, it's not a science, it's an art. So because true Hermetic teachings, and because the tablet, I think, works on any level, you can take the tablet and apply it to any process, and you will see analogs. You can just do a basic herbal stone and read the emerald tablet and go, oh yeah, I can see how the emerald tablet applies to this. Or again, if you're just working on yourself, if you're the vessel, if you're the prima materia, you'll see that the emerald tablet applies and shows you how to transform yourself. It applies on all levels.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. What was the name of that text that you had mentioned again?
Oh, Cracking the Philosopher's Stone.
And who was the author of that one?
Eric J. Laporte.
Interesting. I have to check that one out. That's cool.
It's an interesting book for sure. Very well researched, and some interesting stuff in there.
Yeah. Are there any other interesting things that in relation to how the tablet would apply to antimony that you can touch on?
Sure. Another core concept of the tablet is that it's got the four elements in it. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon, the wind carries in its belly, its nurse is the earth. Right there, we've got earth, air, fire, water. But it also mentions the quintessence, by saying that, it is the consecration of the whole universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. So it's saying if you take your prima materia, whatever your starting material is, and you make a stone out of it, that stone should, in theory, transmute matter. So one idea is that if you work with antimony, that's a valid path to the Philosopher's Stone. There's lots of paths to the Philosopher's Stone. I'm not really saying anything revolutionary here. You can do it with antimony, you can do it with dew, you can do it with urine, you can do it with a whole bunch of different stuff. But it's just the idea that, in creating the Philosopher's Stone through using the operations in the tablet, you can make a stone, and that stone is capable of evolving matter. It's capable of reducing it philosophically, let's say, rendering it fit for purpose.
Definitely. Yeah, one of the really interesting things when I was listening to that Jean Dubuis lecture, when he was talking about starting the amalgams within the process, he was talking about beginning the process of energy transfer and how the energies can only be transferred in the liquid state. So the goal was to transfer the life energy of the antimony into the mercury and then orient that energy towards either the white or silver, depending on if you're using gold or silver. But
yeah,
I was just like, it's just so fascinating thinking about the possibilities in terms of what can be done and how little, at least I know, about all of this stuff.
there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a
Well,
lot. Yeah.
well, is there anything else you would like to speak to on the Emerald Tablet before we move on?
I probably shouldn't say too much more. I'm conscious of I don't want to bore your listeners because I could talk about the tablet all day and all night. But just to say, I think, in summary, that there's all the core hermetic concepts in there. You've got the one, the one thing. You've got, which is prima materia. You've got duality. You've got the four elements. You've got the idea of the quintessence or the stone, the sacred marriage. You've got instructions for working in the lab: separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently with great ingenuity. And you've got you've sort of got also at the end, you've got the three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. That's a really interesting phrase too. I ask you again, what do you think he's referring to there when he's talking about the three parts? What is that for you?
Well, anytime anybody says three, I ultimately just think salt, sulfur, and mercury.
Right.
But so I guess that's kind
Yeah.
of like my initial what comes to my mind.
Yeah.
And then yeah, you could think of three parts of the whole universe as maybe um the celestial salt, the celestial niter, or the masculine, the feminine, and then the what they produce in terms of the
Mm.
what is that word? The meta, what was it?
The
Mesa
mesocosm.
mesocosm, and then
Yeah.
yeah, something
Yeah,
along
the
those
three
lines.
parts of the sacred marriage. Yeah.
Yeah,
Often sun and moon is used as a sort of cover for Mercury and sulfur, you
yeah.
know, and the Hermetic child being the salt,
What
or
about
you could
what
swap
about
those terms around.
for you? How do you feel about it in terms of
The
the
three
three?
parts, yeah, definitely salt, sulfur, Mercury, I think's in there. It sort of could also refer to, some people say it refers to, the teachings of Hermes, being astrology, alchemy, and theurgy,
Mm,
um, uh, which some people equate theurgy to magic, but I would say theurgy is quite different. That's more like, um, it's a mystic path. It's the idea of uniting with a godhead or a god energy, as opposed to magic, which is really about getting things done in the world. It's about performing rituals and working with symbols to affect change
mm.
on a level.
Yeah,
Um,
I wanted to in that interview that I'd listened to, and actually you had mentioned his name in this as well. You mentioned this character, Sir Dunstan, I believe it,
mm,
Saint Dunstan or Sir Dunstan.
St.
And,
Dunstan, St. Dunstan,
yes,
yeah.
and I had never heard of this individual. But I'd just love it if you could talk a little bit about this guy and who he was, what he was up to, and kind of who he associated with and all that.
Oh yeah. Well, he's another someone another thing I love to talk about. I mean, so St. Dunstan's a fascinating character. Um, so picture England, at sort of around the time of the Anglo-Saxons, and he's born into an Anglo-Saxon family, I think in like the 970s or something like that. No, it had to be after then. I'm getting my dates wrong. I can't remember exactly when. Anglo-Saxon times would have been pre-Norman. Um, and he's sort of treading a time. He's in a kind of mesocosmic time, let's say, because he's living in a world that is not yet Christian, but it's still sort of pagan. It's sort of in between. And he was sort of accused of being a sorcerer and practicing magic. And he had like a conversion experience. He converted to Christianity. So he was said to have been from an area in the UK called Glastonbury. It's a very special place that's very close to my heart. If anyone ever gets the chance to go to the UK, I highly recommend you go to Glastonbury, because there's a red and a white spring there, which is of course the red and the white, the stones. There's some interesting archetypal things going on in that place. Um, so Dunstan became the abbot of the abbey at Glastonbury, um, and he was an alchemist. He was a practicing alchemist, and he wrote a text, Philosophia Maturina. He wrote a text on confection of the stone, amongst other things. You can find that text online. It's not hard to find. Um, but he's really interesting because he echoes through our history in alchemy, definitely. He later went on to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, and died in great renown. But there's a story that he was working at his furnace, and kind of a demon or the devil showed up, and Dunstan caught him in with hot tongs. He caught the devil between his nose, and kind of brought him to heed, which almost sounds like a story of ceremonial magic there to me. Um, like calling up a demon, or using the Goetia to control spirits. Um, but I've actually experienced a lot of synchronicities myself with St. Dunstan. So Dunstan when I first moved to Glastonbury, I lived there for a while, and I sort of had this idea. I was encouraged by some people to put on an alchemy conference, and at the time, I thought, oh, okay, this is a big idea, but it felt like a big step up for me. But I thought I'll put it on. So I went to a venue and I said, I'm looking for a date to have this event on, and what have you got? And they gave me a few dates, and I said, I'll take the last date because that's the furthest one in the future. I'll pick that date. So then after that, I was sort of researching Glastonbury and I found out about Dunstan, right? And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. St. Dunstan, there was this philosopher, this alchemist here. And then one night I was in the pub talking to the bard of Glastonbury. So every year Glastonbury has a bard. They elect a bard into their town. And the bard is responsible for writing the songs and the poems of the community. And I'm talking to him and he's like, oh, who are you? What are you doing? His name's Billy the Kelp. And I just told him a bit about myself. I said, oh, I'm putting on this, this conference. And I said to him, I'm actually thinking of putting it in St. Dunstan's honor because I know he's an alchemist and he's from around here. And he was like, oh, okay. And he's like, what date is that on? And I told him the date, which was 21st of May. And he said, oh, he's like, that's interesting. That's St. Dunstan's Day. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, that's his name day. Like that's his saint day is the 21st of May. So just by some kind of, we could say coincidence, I think it's a synchronicity. I think that's the difference. I'd put the conference on his day, and that's the day that New Gold is assayed in England, because Dunstan is actually the patron saint of alchemists and goldsmiths.
Wow, yeah, that's so cool. And that kind of ties into like the synchronicity thing. And you were discussing synchronicity and you were saying that there's a structure to synchronicity, and you're relating synchronicity to something called mirror symmetry. So I was wondering, I think it'd be really cool for you to kind of elaborate because I really like this.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in that story that I've just highlighted, synchronicity, we can kind of see, we could loosely sort of think about it like it's a force that comes into our lives when we're on the right path, I suppose, when we're doing something that speaks to our inner life, when there's congruence between the above and the below, between the inner and the outer. Synchronicity manifests in our life. I'm sure everyone listening, and I'm sure yourself, you've probably even got examples of that. Like you're thinking about something and then it pops up, or you make a decision to do something and things just come together in a way in the outer world that confirms for you, oh, I'm on the right path, or the universe is responding to me, it's communicating with me. So we could sort of loosely think about synchronicity as that force. But that term itself, we get that from Carl Jung. So for those who don't know Carl Jung, he was a Swiss psychologist. He was started out as Freud's contemporary, but eventually became his nemesis. And I think they're like shadows of each other, Freud and Jung. You've got Freud believing that the unconscious is like a kind of a storehouse of dangerous impulses that we have to control and repress in order to keep society functioning, which is sort of went on to influence all our political systems, really, honestly. That theory influenced PR and advertising. That's how all advertising is based on that idea.
Yeah, well, Edward Bernays was the nephew, I think, of Freud, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this story. Yeah. Whereas Jung, I mean, quite the opposite view. He believed that within the unconscious, within us, within our psyche, all of our symbols and our unconscious material, it's a storehouse for who we're really supposed to become, our greatest potential as human beings, and it's our sort of, it's the call of spirit to take that journey so that we can become who we're meant to really be at the end of the day. So Jung was working with a patient, and this patient was very rational. They were very we would say that they were really stuck in their solar aspect, right? If we've got the sun, let's say the sun is your rational thinking brain, and your moon is your intuitive, emotional kind of side. This client was really stuck in their sun. They were really rational, and he was trying to do this work with them, and he couldn't quite get through. But he just sort of surrendered to the process, and he just had faith. No, something's going to come up, and it's going to get through. And eventually, this client had a dream, and they dreamt of a scarab beetle. So scarab beetles appear in Egypt. They're often depicted as a symbol of the heart or of immortality, because scarab beetles appear out of dung hills in the morning. You know, they go into the Negrito, they go into the dung at night, and they come out reborn when the sun rises. So this patient of his had a dream about the scarab, and just then they heard a noise on the window. A bang came to the window, and Jung went over to the window and he opened it, and there was this like a European scarab beetle there. And so he took the scarab beetle over to the patient, and that just cracked them open. They were just like, I can't believe it, you know, and that led them to want to explore this symbol more, which of course led them into this idea of rebirth, and the idea that within them is a storehouse that can evolve their life and take it to a new level. And Jung thought that's interesting, so he called that synchronicity. He invented that word, this idea that once a person starts listening to and following their inner voice, whether that's through dreams or through ritual, or you know, through art, through music, through painting, if in some way we enter into a process like alchemy, where we're exploring that connection between the inner and the outer, between consciousness and matter, between our inner life and our outer life, what starts to happen is we get what's called mirror symmetry. And that's where there's a mirroring between the inner and the outer, between the above and the below. And once that starts to happen, synchronicity starts to happen. So mirror symmetry is just the idea that you start creating a dialogue between your inner and your outer life. And through that synchronization, synchronicity is the output, because there's connection. There isn't separation anymore. We're not seeing ourselves as a separate discrete entity from the world. All is one. You know, everything's interconnected. Yeah.
Damn, I love that. I love that idea of mirror symmetry. It lets you know that you're on the right path, I guess. You
Yeah.
can observe that within your reality.
Yeah. And that's a useful reflection, you know, for listeners, is when you think about your life and you think about synchronicities that have happened, it's sometimes worth considering, you know, what's going on like in my life. What am I doing differently right now that maybe I wasn't doing before? You know, what's happening that these synchronicities are getting thrown up? And for those of us doing alchemy, or you know, ceremonial magic or some other hermetic practice, synchronicity is actually the proof that things are working. If you really think about it, you know, in lab alchemy, when you do a practice, you basically do your process until you feel good inside. You know, if you're feeling bad inside, chances are it's not finished or something's wrong with it. But when you feel good, the materia is usually good. So that's a synchronicity. Or another example might be, you know, like when I first made oil of gold, and I'm like, oh my God, I finished the process. A storm was going, and lightning literally struck outside my window. And I was like, oh my God, you know, I feel like I've got the power of the gods, you know.
Yes.
And I called up Robert actually, and he was laughing. He's like, oh yeah, it's all happening there. But um in ceremonial magic, you know, it's how we know that the magic's working. Like an adept of the Golden Dawn, I heard once say, you know, the magician walks hand in hand with synchronicity. You do a ritual, you forget about it, and then at some point something happens, and you're like, oh, the ritual's working. Like something's going on here.
Yeah, the as within, so without. I
Mm.
did want to get your thoughts on magic and or theurgy. I think you kind of touched a little bit on the difference. So maybe you
Mm.
could um maybe you could again, because it seems like at the very least magic is it's like a it's very psychologically effective in terms of ritual that kind of instigates a psychological change, and theurgy or magic or both. How would you differentiate between the two again, just out of curiosity for yourself?
Yeah. Well, one way to think about it, we could look at it historically, is that if we go back in history to sort of the cults of the ancient world, and we think about cults these days as generally like a very harmful sort of thing headed up by a psychopath, where people are involved in a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
But cults in the old world, I mean, these were essentially mystery schools where people, we might feel a certain affinity for a certain energy or god, and so we would go to that school and learn to commune with that energy or spirit. So we might become a part of the cult of Hermes, for example, or we might become a part of the cult of Isis. And by doing that, you start in sort of the outer courtyard of the temple. And as you slowly become initiated into the ways of that god or goddess, you move through the temple into, say, the inner part. And then if you get to the highest level with all the teachings, you get to go into the inner sanctum where the statue of the god is housed. And but to do that, you need to walk through all the spiritual practices that help you find God within, or God consciousness, whatever you want to call it, non-duality or something. So that's theurgy. Theurgy is the slow evolution of the soul to identify itself with Godhead. By contrast, magic, I mean, if we're talking, pre-Wicca or pre-20th century, really, I mean, the history of magic generally shows that you have different kinds of magic. You might have planetary magic or image magic, as it was called in Renaissance, elemental magic, which might work with the elements or with elemental beings like gnomes or fairies or things like that, um, gods, and you got spirit magic, which works with angels or demons, let's say, the gods of the old world. Magic was generally, if you wanted to get something done, you had to either work with a natural energy, so yeah, the planets or elements, or you work with spirits, but you use that to get something done in the world. So it's like, okay, I need a new place to live, or I need the return of my stolen property. So I'm gonna do a ritual with Mercury here, some mercurial spirit. Um, that's the difference with I guess between, as I see it, between magic and theurgy.
Yeah. And then in regards to like alchemy, what are some of the intersecting nodes of like the points of convergence in terms of alchemy and theurgy or magic, and what are some of the ways in which they can merge and kind of complement one another in that regard?
Yeah, well, there's lots of them. I mean, I think in some senses, alchemy could be seen in and of itself to be a theurgic practice, because when you're doing all the processes, right, as you work on the materia, it's working on you. You're slowly acquainting or getting to know the consciousness of spirit, right, of the all, because you're starting to see yourself in all of these changing forms that you're working with. So as you're working on the matter and you're perfecting it, it's perfecting you, and you're becoming more spiritized. The fixed is becoming volatile. The below is going to the above, back down. So alchemy, I think, in some ways could be said to be a theurgic practice. It's certainly, as well, by imbibing those preparations you make, you're attuning or aligning your consciousness with all of these signatures, and you're becoming more balanced and integrating all of those signatures. So I think you could make the argument that alchemy is a sort of theurgic practice. And interestingly, I think Hermes is one of the only gods to have survived intact from the ancient world. You know, his teachings, all the mystery cults were basically destroyed. Like maybe not all of them, and remnants of parts of them survive. But Hermes's teachings remained intact through alchemy and through what later became Freemasonry. You know, you look at Freemasonry, it's said that Hermes authored all those rituals. Those are theurgic rituals that they're aimed at helping you unlock the secrets of God consciousness, I suppose. But as for magic, I think there are actually many wonderful ways that magical practices can intersect with alchemy, because with alchemy you can, you could say, for example, do something simple like get a tincture you've made or some product you've made and enchant it further. You could enhallow it with a certain energy or to a certain purpose. You could channel some energy down into that. Or vice versa. Let's say you're doing a ritual to work with a certain energy. If you want to do a ritual that's, let's say you're trying to bring health into your life, which is the sun, it's also gold. So, you could use oil of gold in a sun ritual to get you into that zone, into that mindset of solar consciousness. Like you go back to the Renaissance and all of those alchemists, they were all pretty much practicing magic. Side by side, you look at Paracelsus's books, he's talking about alchemy, but other times you've got other texts, debatably his, where he's also talking about magic. You've got a whole set of spirits called the Olympic spirits. I mean, that's almost undoubtedly channeled by a Paracelsian. If anyone just wants to look into the Olympic spirits, and you look up, there's seven gods in the Olympic system. They've basically all got alchemical powers. Like one can help you to understand herbs, another one can help you to create metallic stones. They all carry powers that can help you in your alchemical work. So there's a lot of overlap.
Wow.
Really.
Yeah, that's really cool. So when it comes to, say, like something like planetary magic, or when it comes to, maybe that relates to like planetary hours and alchemy, I guess I really don't know how I feel about the planetary hours in terms of the significance, and I'm definitely these days feeling a little uncertain around that. Definitely skeptical of like the influential potency of, say, like the days of the week. So this is actually a subject me and Trevor Polinsky we're working on a kind of project that goes deeper into some of the concern with some of these things in terms of the alignments with calendar systems and all that. But I'll reserve that details for a later date. I want to get into your personal assessment. How do you see the system of planetary hours versus the importance of like astrological timing, and how do you work with or conceptualize and contrast the functionality and validity between both the planetary hours and the astrological timing of things?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a deep question too. Well, I mean, I've had probably similar reservations to what you've had with planetary hours. They're a necessity in some sort of sense when you're doing certain magical work. Key of Solomon, for example, if you're doing work with that grimoire, like you're instructed to create talismans on certain days and planetary hours. But I mean, I see planetary hours as being a bit like, I think what it does is it interfaces with the microcosm. I think within us there is a really important thing about timing. Like if I've got a job interview, for example, on Friday, I know that it's at a certain time, my mind and my psyche will prepare for that time accordingly. And I think planetary hours are a little bit the same. It's like it gives our mind a structure to work, an interface with certain energies, those 7 archetypes. Because realistically, you look at it and you go, well, if I look outside right now, there's nothing actually in the stars to say, you know, this is the hour of Mercury or it's the hour of whatever, Jupiter. Astrologically speaking, though, we can very definitely look at the sky and say, okay, right now the moon is in front of you know, wherever it is, and say that, okay, it's beaming those energies down onto us. There's a real effect of that. So if I'm timing things in alchemy, firstly, I tend to use the moon quite a bit. You know, a broad stroke is that, you know, your waxing moon, when the moon's going from dark to full, that's a good time to sometimes start a process, because it's a building of energy, the waxing moon. And when the moon is waning, it's when energy is decreasing. You know, in a very real sense, the moon is doing that to Earth all the time. You know, it's shifting the gravitational field of water. But also, I think astrological timing is really important for spagyrics as well. I mean, I think there's wisdom too, though, in just starting things when it feels right. But certainly, if you're looking to harness astral energies, it's much better done considering where the moon is, where the sun is, where all the planets are positioned, and their relationship to each other. You know, are they in favorable aspects, like a trine, you know, or a sextile, or are they unfavorable aspects? You know, is there a square or something else going on? And then I would just tend to use the planetary hours as secondary. So I'd use the astrological timing first, and then I would, okay, so I'll choose my day on the astrological time, but then I'll go, okay, I'll go for the planetary hour on that day. So then I've got both bases covered, right? I'm pleasing the inner and the outer.
Yeah, and I think the way you explain it like that actually lends makes a lot of sense. And in terms of that, just establishing some sort of mental framework can be super beneficial in terms of being able to set that intention for whatever it is you're doing, like how you're saying you do with the planetary hours, and then stacking that on top of the actual astrological uh elections or whatever. That's
Mm.
that's probably as good as you can get. So I like that a lot.
Yeah,
There's something else
I
I was
think. Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the planetary hours, you know, if we think of them as the archetypes or the spirits, you know, whether you believe they are psychological in nature or whether you believe they're actually entities, they will come when called. So using the planetary hours has that use as well, because it's sort of giving homage to them,
yeah.
is a way of thinking about it.
One thing I always love to bring up, which I probably bring it up too much, but I love there's these old studies. I think Lily Kalisko was one of the names of the
Oh, yeah.
scientists, and they did those. Yeah, you're familiar with the like say like with gold crystallization in the sun and the differences
Mm,
between an eclipse, and it's demonstrating that there are actual, which we to us it's obvious, but for some people it's a little like far out to think of planetary influences and how they affect the structures of matter and all of that. But I like to reference those studies because it gives a little bit of concrete evidence to maybe people that are more suspicious or curious about that. So I just like to always throw that out there.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a really interesting study, wasn't it? It's sort of looking at the influence of the planets and metals on Earth and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
I think there was one with like blood coagulation as well, and
Mm,
the the response that that had in terms of different planets or something. I don't really remember the details too well.
mm,
But yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say in regards to magic and alchemy, their convergences or the
mm.
astrological implications of things?
Um, I mean, not really, but I think astrology is a study in and of. I sort of see these things as like the legs of a stool, you know, like alchemy, magic, and astrology. I think they kind of all complement each other, and they all fit together, and together I think they can give a, I mean, they're the foundational kind of studies of the Western occult tradition. So I think having a little bit of knowledge of all of them can be good. It can really help. They each help the other. They can each help augment your knowledge and understanding of all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think alchemical preparations are fantastic in ritual, and before I send oil of gold out that I make, I usually do a kind of solar, a very simple solar enchanting ritual on it, and put the sigil of the sun, the planetary intelligence of the sun on the label, because
I love
I
that.
think it gives it a little extra kick.
Even I had some spagyrics recently sent to me from, I think it was Taylor Doretti of Medicine Voodoo Labs, and I
Mm,
loved that he had the corresponding symbols um within the labels, like say like the Mercury symbol for like a ginseng spagyric,
mm,
because it gives that extra sort of intention and potency, I think,
mm.
in terms of like you're being able to recognize that with your mind and that
Yeah,
connection with the mind and the substance. And I don't know, I love
yeah,
that stuff, and I think it's really cool to do, and that's cool that you're doing that too.
yeah. Well, those symbols are egregores. They have a consciousness in and of themselves, and so like that was often sometimes a cure for things in the ancient world, was writing a sigil on a piece of paper and actually getting the person to eat the piece of paper,
Mhm.
because it has an energy, and whether you believe it's placebo or whatever, I
Yeah,
think it just points again to the nature of consciousness and the effect that consciousness has on matter, and on the person, on the observer.
absolutely.
Mm,
Well, if you have time for a couple closing questions before we wrap it up, one of the things I want to ask you is if there are any particular lines of inquiry that you're currently exploring, or working on in terms of just expanding your own uh, personal knowledge and awareness. Curious about that.
mm. Yeah, within alchemy, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm fiddling around a lot with antimony, and have been for some time. I mean, I could probably fiddle around with it for the rest of my life, I think, and still not fathom its mysteries. I'm will always be a student, I think, in that. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in the stone, I think, like a lot of alchemists are, and got my own kind of things going there.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, what else? Um, I mean, I'm also very interested in running events for alchemy, because I think alchemy can often be such a solitary pursuit,
Yeah.
and alchemists are often quite solitary creatures, and I think there's a light and a dark side to that.
Yeah.
Like
Has
you
its
see
pros
it.
and
I
cons.
Yeah, like we have to do the work, of course. No one can initiate you. Like, you doing the work is what you know raises your consciousness. But I do think that a lot of alchemists could benefit from spending time with other alchemists, because you kind of have the hermetic seal going for too long, and people, I think, you see that, I think, a lot in a lot of the world, like the social media, and a lot of alchemists trashing each other, and or people going, oh, that person, they're not really doing alchemy, or that's not alchemy what you're doing. And I think it's really sad, because it's like, well, who is anyone to think that they know everything, right? I mean, who is
Right.
anyone to think that their perspective is the only one, and it's the true one, and it's the correct one? I mean, that's just a rookie mistake. um,
100%.
um, but I think that alchemy sometimes does lend to people going down that kind of mindset, which is unfortunate, because you get conferences and events that I've ran, you get alchemists in a room with each other, and you can't shut them up. Like, they won't stop talking to each other, because suddenly, oh my God, I've found my tribe. I'm spending time with other alchemists, and there's so much exchange that goes on, and everyone's giving each other spagyrics and processes, and
learning from each
Um,
other. Yeah, I agree
yeah,
with you 100%. I would love to see that, more of that. And I love that. I love anytime I see any alchemists shouting out or supporting any other alchemists, because it's just a really
yeah,
cool thing to kind of help bring everybody up and help uplift and meet someone where they're at and help raise each other up and set that kind of standard just for the overall community and perpetuate that going forward. So I definitely agree with you on that.
mm,
And I love that one of the things I love about you is that you are very flexible in terms of not being super rigid, like ideologically, even like when we were talking about the interpretations of things like the um Emerald Tablet, there's a candidate of it pertaining to the dew, or maybe it's this, or maybe, and I
mm,
love that flexibility. And I think that that's super important too, that we don't get too caught up in just one way or thinking that we have all the answers, because I think we're all sort of trying to learn together here and figure things out. And the more perspectives that we can get, that's just gonna broaden everybody's awareness, and that's a gift to everybody. So shout
yeah.
compliments to you on that. The other question I wanted to ask you was about the name of the Temple of Mercury. I'd love it. I think
Mm.
it's awesome. And I wonder if you could just speak to that and why you chose that name.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, Mercury is he's our homeboy, isn't he? He's sort of he's the man. I mean, um, it's the central archetype, but Mercury, it has so many meanings, doesn't it? It's got so many levels to it. Mercury is literally Quicksilver, but there's also philosophic Mercury, Mercury philosophic too. There's the idea of being mercurial as well, having a mind that can apprehend anything, like which my teacher Dennis said to me once. He said, be mercurial. And I just loved that. I thought that's such a lovely encapsulation of the path, going back to what you were saying about, perspectives. It's like everyone's perspective, I think, is valid in its own way, on alchemy and on any topic. And um, I think that I think that this is probably something a bit controversial to say, but I think that alchemy, at least from a psychotherapeutic perspective, is a bit of a traumatized art. You look at the history of alchemy, there's a lot of persecution, a lot of secrecy, but you look to the early days of alchemy, and it was, in Alexandria, you've got all these different groups all working together, all helping each other. The Jews, the Egyptians, the Greeks, Phoenicians. You know, I think that the best view for what we do is to, you know, to a certain degree, bring it out into the light and make space for each other. And I think the mercurial archetype is it's just a wonderful energy too. It's sort of that mesocosmic kind of force as well that can travel between worlds. Um, yeah, I just love Mercury. And
Yeah. And I love temples too, by the way.
mm,
The idea of
yeah.
actually, I would love, my dream vision is just to have a giant stone temple to,
Mm,
I could imagine or envision alchemists in a stone temple just learning alchemy from each other, or running experiments, or I don't know. I like the idea of a dedicated place that's symmetrical and very nice temple structure. I just like the
mm,
idea of temples and what they represent, because it's kind of like a sacred um, symbol of whether it's for alchemy or anything else in particular, just uh, or it's our body as our temple. It's something that's a sacred uh, place that inhabits particular consciousness or a teaching or a mystery school or whatever. And I love that. So
mm.
this is all to say I love the name of your Temple of Mercury. But
Oh, thank you. That's exactly what I had envisaged for it too. a space where people can learn. And I guess I've got visions on expanding the school as well. And I also like the idea that, just to go back quickly to alchemy and magic, is that there was this vision that Frater Albertus had of, he had Israel Regardie come in and study with him, and they had a vision of creating a school which included ceremonial magic and alchemy. And that's my vision. I think the temple as it exists, it's an online school, but it is a physical entity as well. Wherever I go, the temple goes with me as a physical and hallowed kind of place. And I've got the same vision as you. I think I think that image of a place to go, a sacred place to go, where that energy of Mercury is hallowed and housed, or Thoth, let's say, Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, and where you can learn his arts, alchemy and magic. It's a great vision, I think.
Yeah, and shout out to Frater Albertus for kind of paving the way in a lot of regards and pushing forward alchemy, because he definitely did do a lot in that regard. So I always like to point that out there, because it's just
absolutely
good to be noted.
Absolutely, I second that.
Yeah.
Frater, I mean, he was a person too. Like he didn't have every answer, but his system is ingenious in a way, because he taught a lot of stuff. But if you walk through all three levels of prima secunda tertia, and you can connect the dots between them, there's paths to the stone right in front of your eyes. He's telling you how to do it, but he didn't want to give all the keys to everyone straight away. He wanted to see what can individuals manifest with this knowledge. So I'm on your level too. I feel like he gifted the world so much, and I challenge anybody to synthesize and syncretize all of the information that he did into one system. He was a genius.
Definitely.
You can't put it any other way.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll give the floor over to you, and if there's any last kind of message that you want to put out there, anything at all, feel free to give your kind of closing thoughts, and then you can direct people wherever you wish to your work.
Sure. I mean, I would just say be mercurial. If you're stuck on something in life, notice that sometimes our mind wants to think that the answer is either or. It wants us to be stuck in the binary system of duality. It's either this or it's that. But a quick way to circumvent that is to consider that life isn't either or, it's both. So it's an and, not a but. So be mercurial, have a mind that is like Mercury. It can become a liquid or a solid. It can change and go with the flow and move and apprehend opposites and unite them, in the case of a philosophic Mercury. So yeah, be mercurial. Certainly if you're interested in my work and what I do, if you're interested in seeing stuff that I periodically have for sale, I don't always keep a regular stockpile of certain products, because I just end up selling excess of stuff that I make or give away. You can find that on the templeofmercury.com, or sign up to my class in herbal alchemy, which is like a video course. It gives you video demonstrations of lab processes, but also there's a few lessons in there on spiritual alchemy and on the tablet. And yeah, or just sign up to the mailing list, because I do often run free things online as well, like free Zoom classes, or just a free lecture here and there as well, or I run a conference here and there, or I'm teaching for other people. So yeah.
Excellent. This was a blast. I greatly appreciate you and all that you're doing, and so I just want to thank you one more time. And yes, it was a pleasure.
Oh, look, you're absolutely welcome. It's my joy to always share the Hermetic teachings and what little work I can do to hopefully do them honor and preserve them. And I want to say thank you to you too, because you're doing just wonderful things in this space of bringing it to so many people in the 21st century through this podcast. It's just a wonderful service you're doing for the community here. So, you know, thank you to you too. I'm really grateful that you're out there doing what you're doing.
Appreciate it.